From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
It's my particular pleasure to introduce our next speaker, a friend of mine, who is also a writer a few of you may have heard of. Neil Gaiman has been one of the major figures in the graphic novel for genre in particular for 20 years, but in science fiction in general for just as long, and also in children's books, now with his book Coraline and several others. He is certainly one of the most well-known names and one of the most original imaginations in all of science fiction and fantasy today. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce Neil Gaiman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. The reason I have the sinister beard is because back in May, I filmed for the Fox Movie Channel the introductions to their 13 Nights of Fright thing that they're running from, I think it goes from the 19th of October through to Halloween. And I thought, okay, I should look sinister. I should look like Cain and Abel from House of Mystery or something. So I did the little sinister beard to be a horror host. And now the thing is just about to air, and I realized I had to grow the same sinister beard. I remember how it went, just so that in photos I look more or less the same as I look next week when I turn up on television. That is why a sinister beard. The plan for the next 40 minutes is more or less as follows. I want to try reading bits to you from the novel that I'm currently writing. I didn't need much more than that, did I? I was going to offer to do questions and stuff after. We'll see how we're doing for time, and then I'll probably do a few questions and a few answers. You can do the questions, I will do the answers. Right, novel. It is called Anansi Boys. And Anansi, for those of you who were wondering, is originally an African, later a West Indian trickster god, a spider god. And I'll do a bit from the beginning of the book, and then, because I'm feeling perverse, I'd like to do a little bit from the middle of the book. It begins, as most things begin, with a song. In the beginning, after all, were the words, and they came with a tune. That was how the world was made, how the void was divided, how the lands and the stars and the dreams and the little gods and the animals, how all of them came into the world. They were sung. The great beasts were sung into existence after the singer had done with the planets and the hills and the trees and the oceans and the lesser beasts. The cliffs that bound existence were sung, and the hunting grounds and the dark. Songs remain. They last. The right song can turn an emperor into a laughingstock, can bring down dynasties. A song can last long after the events and the people in it are dust and dreams and gone. That's the power of songs. There are other things you can do with songs. They do not only make worlds or recreate existence. Fat Charlie Nancy's father, for example, was simply using them to have what he hoped and expected would be a marvelous night out. Before Fat Charlie's father had come into the bar, the barman had been of the opinion that the whole karaoke evening was going to be an utter bust. But then the little old man had sashayed into the room, past the table of several blonde women with fresh sunburns and smiles of tourists who were sitting by the little makeshift stage in the corner. He tipped his hat to them, for he wore a hat, a spotless white fedora, and lemon yellow gloves, and then he walked over to their table. They giggled. "Are you enjoying yourselves, ladies?" he asked. They continued to giggle and told him they were having a good time, thank you, and that they were here on vacation. He said to them, "It gets much better, just you wait." He was older than they were, much, much older. But he was charm itself, like something from a bygone age when fine manners and courtly gestures were worth something. The barman relaxed. With someone like this in the bar, it was going to be a good evening. There was karaoke. There was dancing. The old man got up to sing on the makeshift stage not once that evening, but twice. He had a fine voice and an excellent smile and feet that twinkled when he danced. The first time he got up to sing, he sang, "What's New, Pussycat?" The second time he got up to sing, he ruined Fat Charlie's life. Fat Charlie was only ever fat for a handful of years. From shortly before the age of 9, when his mother announced to the world that if there was one thing she was over and done with, and if the gentleman in question had any argument with it, he could just stick it you-know-where, it was her marriage to the elderly goat that she had just made the unfortunate mistake of marrying, and she would be leaving in the morning for somewhere a long way away, and he had better not try to follow. To the age of 14, when Fat Charlie grew a little and exercised a little more. He was not fat. Truth to tell, he was not really even chubby, simply a little soft looking around the edges. But the name Fat Charlie clung to him like chewing gum to the sole of a tennis shoe. He'd introduce himself as Charles, or in his early 20s, Chaz, or in writing as C. Nancy, but it was no use. The name would creep in, infiltrating the new part of his life, just as cockroaches invade the cracks in the world behind the fridge in a brand new kitchen, and like it or not, and he didn't, he would be Fat Charlie again. It was, he knew irrationally, because his father had given him the nickname, and when his father gave things names, they stuck. There was a dog who'd lived in the house across the way, in the street on which Fat Charlie had grown up. It was a chestnut-coloured boxer, long-legged and pointy-eared, with a face that looked like the beast had, as a puppy, run face-first into a wall. Its head was raised, its tail nub erect. It was unmistakably an aristocrat among canines. It had entered dog shows. It had rosettes for best of breed and for best in class, and even one rosette marked best in show. This dog rejoiced in the name of Campbell's McInrory Arbuthnot VII. And its owners, when they were feeling familiar, called it Kai. This lasted until the day that Fat Charlie's father, sitting out on their dilapidated porch swing, sipping his beer, noticed the dog as it ambled back and forth across the neighbour's yard on a leash that ran from a palm tree to a fence post. "Hell of a goofy dog," said Fat Charlie's father. "Like that friend of Donald Duck's. Hey, Goofy!" And what once had been best in show suddenly slipped and shifted. For Fat Charlie, it was as if he saw the dog through his father's eyes, and darned if he wasn't a pretty goofy dog. All things considered, almost rubbery. It didn't take long for the name to spread up and down the street. Campbell's McInrory Arbuthnot VII's owners struggled with it, but they might as well have stood their ground and argued with a hurricane. Total strangers would pat the once proud boxer's head and say, "Hello, Goofy, how's a boy?" The dog's owners stopped entering him in dog shows soon after that. They didn't have the heart. "Goofy-looking dog," said the judges. Fat Charlie's father's names for things stuck. That was just how it was. Now, this was far from the worst thing about Fat Charlie's father. There had been, during the years that he was growing up, a number of candidates for the worst thing about Fat Charlie's father. His roving eye and equally as adventurous fingers, at least according to the young ladies of the area, who would complain to Fat Charlie's mother. And then there would be trouble. The little black cigarillos he called cheroots, which he smoked, the smell of which clung to everything he touched. His fondness for a peculiar shuffling form of tap dancing, fashionable Fat Charlie suspected for half an hour in Harlem in the 1920s. His total and invincible ignorance about current world affairs, combined with his apparent conviction that sitcoms were half-hour-long insights into the lives and struggles of real people. These individually, as far as Fat Charlie was concerned, were none of them the worst thing about Fat Charlie's father, although each of them had contributed to the worst thing. The worst thing about Fat Charlie's father was simply this: he was embarrassing. Of course, everyone's parents are embarrassing. It goes with the territory. The nature of parents is to embarrass merely by existing. Just as it is the nature of children of a certain age to cringe with embarrassment, shame and mortification should their parents so much as speak to them on the street. Fat Charlie's father, of course, had elevated this to an art form, and he rejoiced in it. Just as he rejoiced in practical jokes from the simple, Fat Charlie would never forget the first time he climbed into an apple pie bed, to the unimaginably complex. Like what? Asked Rosie, Fat Charlie's fiancée, one evening, when Fat Charlie, who normally did not talk about his father, had attempted stumblingly to explain why he believed that simply inviting his father to their upcoming wedding would be a horrendously bad idea. They were in a wine bar in South London at the time. Fat Charlie had long been of the opinion that 4,000 miles in the Atlantic Ocean were both good things to keep between himself and his father. Well, said Fat Charlie, and he remembered a parade of indignities, each one of which made his toes curl involuntarily. He settled upon one of them. Well, when I moved from the local junior school to the middle school, my dad made a point of telling me how much he'd always looked forward to President's Day when he was a boy, because it's the law that on President's Day, the kid who goes to school dressed as their favorite presidents get a big bag of candy. Oh, that's a nice law, said Rosie. I wish we had something like that here. Rosie had never been out of England, if you didn't count a Club 18 to 30 holiday to an island in, she was fairly certain, the Mediterranean. She had warm brown eyes and a good heart, even if geography was not her strongest suit. It's not a nice law, said Fat Charlie. It's not a law at all. He made it up. There is no tradition of going to school on President's Day dressed as your favorite president. Kids dressed as presidents do not get big bags of candy by an act of Congress. Nor is your popularity in the years ahead, all through middle school and high school, decided entirely by which president you decided to dress as. The average kids dress as the obvious presidents, the Lincolns and the Washingtons and the Jeffersons, but the ones who will become popular, they dress as John Quincy Adams or Warren Gamaliel Harding or someone like that. And it's bad luck to talk about it before the day. Or rather, it isn't, but he said it was. Boys and girls dress up as presidents? Oh yes, boys and girls. So I spent the week before President's Day reading everything there was to read about presidents in the World Book Encyclopedia, trying to choose the right one. Didn't you ever suspect that he was pulling your leg? Fat Charlie shook his head. It's not something you think about when my dad starts to work you over. He's the finest liar you'll ever meet. He's convincing. Rosie took a sip of her Chardonnay. So, which president did you go to school as? Taft. He was the 27th president. I wore a brown suit my father had found somewhere, with the legs all rolled up and a pillow stuffed down the front. I had a painted-on moustache. My dad took me to school himself that day. I walked in so proudly. The other kids just screamed and pointed, and somewhere in there I locked myself in a cubicle in the boys' room and cried. They wouldn't let me go home to change. I went through that day like that. It was hell. You should have made something up, said Rosie. You were going to a costume party afterward or something, or just told them the truth. Yeah, said Fat Charlie, meaningfully and gloomily remembering. What did your dad say when you got home? Oh, he hooted with laughter, chuckled and chortled and chittered and all of that. And then he told me that maybe they didn't do that President's Day stuff anymore. Now, why didn't we go down to the beach and look for mermaids? Look for mermaids? Oh, we'd go down to the beach and walk along it, and he'd be as embarrassing as any human being on the face of this planet has ever been. He'd start singing, and he'd start doing a shuffling sort of sand dance on the sand, and he'd just talk to people as he went, people he didn't even know, people he'd never met. And I hated it. Except he told me there were mermaids out there in the Atlantic, and if I looked fast enough and sharp enough, I'd see one. There, he'd say, do you see her? She was a big old redhead with a green tail. And I looked, but I never did. He shook his head. Then he took a handful of mixed nuts from the bowl on the table and began to toss them into his mouth, chomping down on them, as if each nut was a 20-year-old indignity that could never be erased. Well, said Rosie brightly, I think he sounds lovely. A real character. We have to get him to come over for the wedding. He'll be the life and soul of the party. Which, Fat Charlie explained after briefly choking on a Brazil nut, was really the last thing you wanted at your wedding, after all, wasn't it? Your father turning up and being life and soul of the party. He said that his father was, he had no doubt, still the most embarrassing person on screen earth. He added that he was perfectly happy not to have seen the old goat for several years, and that the best thing his mother ever did was to leave his father and come to England to stay with her Aunt Alana. He buttressed this by stating categorically that he was damned, double damned, and quite possibly even thrice damned if he was going to invite his father to their wedding. In fact, said Fat Charlie in closing, the best thing about getting married was not having to invite his dad to the reception. And then Fat Charlie saw the expression on Rosie's face and the icy glint in her normally friendly eyes, and he corrected himself hurriedly, explaining that he meant the second best thing. But it was already much too late. You'll just have to get used to the idea, said Rosie. After all, a wedding is a marvelous opportunity for mending fences and building bridges. It's your opportunity to show him that there are no hard feelings. But there are hard feelings, said Fat Charlie. Lots. So, I don't know if I'm giving too much away here, but you're all guinea pigs, and I did read some of the first chapter at Worldcon, so I want to try reading bits I've never read before, ever, out loud. So I hope I'm not giving too much away at this point by telling you Fat Charlie's father is dead, and which is a relief for him because he doesn't have to invite him to the wedding. But he discovers very rapidly that he has a brother. He discovers two things. He has this little conversation with his old family friend, Mrs. Higgler, and I will sort of sum it up. I'll do the short version. After the funeral, he says, well, you know, Dad, I didn't really know him. What kind of a person was he? He was, and he starts listing all his father's faults, and Mrs. Higgler says, well, you can't really judge him like you would judge other people because he was a god. And he says, no, he was a lot of things, but he was not a god. And she says, oh yes, he was. He was Anansi, the spider god. And he says, well, hang on, if he was a god, surely I should have magical godlike powers. And she says, oh, your brother got all that. And of course, his brother winds up entering his life. And I thought I'd read you a little bit of what happens when Fat Charlie wakes up with a hangover and his brother Spider has gone into work in his place. Fat Charlie was thirsty. Fat Charlie was thirsty and his head hurt. Fat Charlie was thirsty and his head hurt and his mouth tasted evil and his eyes were too tight in his head and all his teeth twinged and his stomach burned and his back was aching in a way that started around his knees and went up to his forehead and his brains have been removed and replaced with cotton balls and needles and pins, which was why it hurt to try and think, and his eyes were not just too tight in his head, but they must have rolled out in the night and been reattached with roofing nails. And now he noticed that anything louder than the gentle Brownian motion of air molecules drifting softly past each other was above his pain threshold. Also, he wished he were dead. Fat Charlie opened his eyes, which was a mistake, in that it let daylight in, which hurt. It also told him where he was, in his own bed, in his bedroom, and because he was staring at the clock on his bedside table, it also told him that the time was 11:30. That, he thought, one word at a time, was about as bad as things could get. He had the kind of hangover that an Old Testament God might have smitten the Midianites with. And the next time he saw Graham Coates, he would undoubtedly learn that he had been fired. He wondered if he could sound convincingly sick over the phone, then realized the challenge would be convincingly sounding anything else. He could not remember getting home last night. He would phone the office the moment he was able to remember the telephone number. He would apologize, crippling 24-hour flu, flat on his back, nothing that could be done. You know, said someone in the bed next to him, I think there's a bottle of water on your side, could you pass it over here? Fat Charlie wanted to explain that there was no water on his side of the bed, and that there was, in fact, no water closer than the bathroom sink if he disinfected the toothbrush mug first. But he realized he was staring at one of several bottles of water sitting on the bedside table. He reached his hand out and closed fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else around it. Then, with the sort of effort people usually reserve for hauling themselves up the final few feet of a sheer rock face, he rolled over in bed. It was the vodka and orange drinker from last night. Also, she was naked. She took the water and pulled the sheet up to cover her chest. Ta! He said to tell you, she said, when you woke, not to worry about calling work and telling them you were ill. He said to tell you he's already taken care of it. Fat Charlie's mind was not put at rest. His fears and worries were not allayed. Having said that, in the condition he was in, he only had room in his head for one thing to worry about at a time, and right now he was worrying about whether or not he'd make it to the bathroom in time. You'll need more liquids, said the girl. You'll need to replenish your electrolytes. And I'm actually going to skip to Spider in the office, his brother. Spider was having a great day at the office. He almost never worked in offices. He almost never worked. Everything was new. Everything was marvelous and strange, from the tiny lift that lurched him up to the 5th floor to the offices of the Graham Coates agency. He stared fascinated at the glass case in the lobby filled with dusty awards. He walked through the offices, and whenever anyone asked who he was, he'd say, I'm Fat Charlie Nancy, and he'd say it in his God voice, which would make whatever he'd said practically true. He found the tea room and made himself several cups of tea. Then he carried them back to Fat Charlie's desk and arranged them around it in an artistic fashion. He started to play with the computer network. It asked him for a password. I'm Fat Charlie Nancy, he told the computer, but there were still places it didn't want him to go. So he said, I'm Graham Coates, and it opened to him like a flower. He looked at things on the computer till he got bored. It occurred to him that Fat Charlie would be waking up around now, so he called him at home in order to reassure him. He just felt that he was making a little headway when Graham Coates put his head around the door and ran his fingers across his stoat-like lips and beckoned. Gotta go, Spider said to his brother. The big boss needs to talk to me. He put down the phone. Making private phone calls on company time, Nancy, stated Graham Coates. Abso-friggin-lutely, agreed Spider. And was that myself you were referring to as the big boss? Asked Graham Coates. They walked to the end of the hallway and into his office. You're the biggest, said Spider, and the bossest. Graham Coates looked puzzled. He suspected he was being made fun of, but he was not certain, and this disturbed him. Well, sit ye down, he said. Spider sat him down. It was Graham Coates' custom to keep the turnover of staff at the Graham Coates agency fairly constant. Some people came and went, others came and remained until the day before their jobs would begin to carry some kind of employment protection. Fat Charlie had been there longer than anyone, 1 year and 11 months. 1 month to go before redundancy payments or industrial tribunals could become a part of his life. There was a speech that Graham Coates gave before he fired someone. He was very proud of his speech. Into each life, he began, a little rain must fall. There's no cloud without a silver lining. It's an ill wind, offered Spider, that blows no one good. Yes, indeed. Well, as we pass through this vale of tears, we must pause to reflect that the first cut, said Spider, is the deepest. What? Oh. Graham Coates scrabbled to remember what came next. Happiness, he pronounced, is like a butterfly. Or a bluebird, agreed Spider. Quite, if I may finish. Of course, be my guest, said Spider cheerfully. And the happiness of every soul at the Graham Coates Agency is as important to me as my own. I cannot tell you, said Spider, how happy that makes me. Yes, said Graham Coates. Well, I better get back to work, said Spider. It's been a blast, though. Next time you want to share some more, just call me. You know where I am. Happiness, said Graham Coates. His voice was taking on a faintly strangulated quality. And what I wonder, Nancy, Charles, is this: are you happy here? And do you not agree that you might be rather happier elsewhere? That's not what I wonder, said Spider. You want to know what I wonder? Graham Coates said nothing. It had never gone like this before. Normally, at this point, their faces fell and they went into shock. Sometimes they cried. Graham Coates had never minded when they cried. What I wonder, said Spider, is what the accounts in the Cayman Islands are for. You know, because it almost sort of looks like money that should go into our client accounts sometimes just goes into the Cayman Island accounts instead. And it seems a funny sort of way to organise the finances for the money coming in to rest in those accounts. I've never seen anything like it before. I was hoping you could explain it to me. Graham Coates had gone off-white. One of those colours that turn up in paint catalogues with names like Magnolia or Ivory. He said, how did you get access to those accounts? Computers, said Spider. Do they drive you as nuts as they drive me? What can you do? Graham Coates thought for several long moments. He always liked to imagine that his financial affairs were so deeply tangled that even if the fraud squad were ever able to conclude that financial crimes had been committed, they'd find it extremely difficult to explain to a jury exactly what kind of crimes they were. There's nothing illegal about having offshore accounts, he said, as carelessly as possible. Illegal? Said Spider. I should hope not. I mean, if I saw anything illegal, I should have to report it to the appropriate authorities. Graham Coates picked up a pen from his desk, and he put it down again. Ah, he said, well, delightful though it is to chat, converse, spend time, and otherwise hobnob with you, Charles, I suspect that both of us have work we should be getting on with. Time and tide, after all, wait for no man. Procrastination is the thief of time. Life is a rock, suggested Spider, but the radio rolled me. Whatever. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. What would you like to know?
A second Neverwhere.
One day. A second Neverwhere one day. Yes?
Will you sing the song from Coraline?
No. If you want, you can always buy the reading, the CD, and you can listen to Stephen Merritt singing the song. The Stephen Merritt from the Magnetic Fields and the Future Bible Heroes and the Sixth actually wrote the tune for the evil Coraline rat song and sang it to me once, walking across the street in New York, worrying the lady who was standing crossing the street. You know, we're just walking across, and I said, oh, what's the song like? And Stephen suddenly goes, we have teeth and we have... Yes?
Why sushi?
Why sushi? I like sushi. I mean, you know, people say that it's only dead raw fish. But, I don't know. Maybe I was a walrus in a previous lifetime. Very big on dead raw fish.
You mentioned that Fat Albert found his father very embarrassing.
Yes. But yes.
Do your children find you embarrassing or like?
Oh God, yes. I have this little black Mini Cooper And this is the most embarrassing car that anybody can possibly drive, if you are my 10-year-old daughter, Maddie. I'm not allowed to actually drive it up to her school. I have to drive it at a distance for her to get out, and I have to turn off the radio or any music before she gets out of the car in case her friends can hear what I'm listening to, which is also embarrassing. So yes. But I mean, that's just standard embarrassment. That's the embarrassment that parents can do merely by breathing, standing, and failing to die at an appropriate time.
Has your life changed in any significant way since people have started reading your blog and feeling like they know you?
I don't know. I mean, every now, from my perspective, it hasn't changed. You know, I did have a rather odd moment during the 2 hours of signing this morning when somebody actually did give me some black socks. Complained on my journal before that I was sockless, and where did they all go? And you know, and it can occasionally be rather peculiar. You suddenly realize that people know the names of your cats and things. But no, I don't think so. The blog is this peculiar entity in itself. We now have, I believe, roughly 600,000 individual users a month coming by from all over the world, and I don't even think many of them read my books. They just like the blog. It's become this thing. Yes? Go for it.
Okay. And this is a really minor little thing, but I figure I might as well go ahead and say it because I'm never going to get the chance to do this again.
Go for it.
It's not a cubicle, it's a stall.
Over here, possibly. But I started on that side of the ocean. Back where we know the difference between sidewalks and pavements.
Okay, since I haven't actually asked a question, would you explain the difference between a sidewalk and a pavement?
Well, actually, in America, sidewalks and pavements are different things. The sidewalk is the sidewalk, the pavement is the paved area. In England, they are actually the same thing, and we don't use the word sidewalk. And we look at people funny who do. And we say, you're not from around here, are you? Which the English can say better than anyone in the world. Even people from the American South can't say it quite as snottily as the English. Yes?
Depends if you've gone to Texas. After reading The Sandman, one of my friends just stopped writing for a while. She's like, it's all been written. Everything has been written. And I kind of feel that way about a lot of things that I read from yours. You allude to such a wide variety of literature and such old literature, such contemporary literature, that how do you weave all of those stories together? And does it just come out that way, or?
Writing, it's an analogy I've used before, but it's I suppose kind of like composting. You spend your life just throwing things on, inputting stuff, and then it rots down into something fertile that you grow stuff from. That's what I do. You know, it's like the people who say to me, well, did you do a lot of research for American Gods? And I say, well, it depends which way you look at it. It was either 40 years of solid reading. You know, I barely researched anything except the Slavic gods, so I wanted to know a lot more about when it actually came to writing the book. But you read that stuff. I love reading. I love knowing things. If I wasn't a writer, I'd be one of these really, really boring guys that you meet in bars. I would be like Cliff Clavin from Cheers. I would just, you know, the one telling you the roots of peculiar pieces of etymological things, and you'd be going, make him go away, make him stop. Instead, I get to throw them into books and have fun. We're still got a couple of minutes. 3 or 4 minutes, yes.
This is a question you can answer, but I'm sure everybody would like to know. Is there a possibility that you'll be writing Miracle Man for Marvel?
Yes, we're still negotiating contracts and stuff, but we're very much hoping to get the story well, get all the stuff that exists so far reprinted, and then for Mark Buckingham and I to go back and finish the story that stopped when Eclipse went bankrupt in 93, 94. So yeah, I mean, it's being negotiated. It could all... I'll make an announcement on my blog as soon as everything's signed and sealed. But we'll work on it.
I'm kind of internet challenged, so I don't read your blog that much. And I mean, I have read it before. I do like it. So I have no idea if you've mentioned this recently, but the Coraline movie, Henry Selick, is that going to happen?
Yeah, it actually appears to be the Coraline movie with Henry Selick. We genuinely didn't know if it was going to go or not. They reached the very, very last day of their option. And we were sort of sitting there going, well, either they will actually activate their option and start making this movie, or tomorrow we'll sell it, we'll figure out who in the line of people who's come up to us and said, as soon as that option lapses, will we buy Coraline, we sell it to. Henry is doing it, he's doing it through Vinton Studios, who are stop motion people. They began with the California Raisins and currently are doing Tim Burton's The Corpse Bride. And it will be a stop motion movie. And they're going into production and they've activated their option, and I wish them luck. Oh, other movie things, because we've got about a minute and people will just ask at the signing afterwards if I don't say this. Mirror Mask is a movie that I wrote from a story that Dave McKean and I came up with, and the first little sort of teaser trailer's up. A proper trailer should go up at mirrormask.com next week, and Dave McKean says that the film should be finished by the end of the month, and we're putting it in currently for Sundance, hoping to get it released and on distribution around February. So keep an eye out for it then.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.